Hello and welcome everyone to a brand new episode of Anyline Anytime, coming to you from the Anyline headquarter office in Vienna, Austria. My name is Mark Babin, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you join us today for this great episode where we're discussing artificial intelligence in business. And I think you'll be surprised what we're going to be talking about today. Joining me in studio is Clemens Wasner, founder and CEO at Enlight AI, and a good friend to the Anyline brand. Now, Clemens is an expert in AI and integrating it within a large variety of business processes. At Enlight AI, he helps to provide clients with strategy and concept development, as well as prototyping and implementation. Clemens, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you in the studio, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So before we jump into the main topics of today, I would like to start with looking at your intensive background in AI. Obviously, you have a wealth of experience from around the world on the subject matter. I'd love to know a bit about the background you have and what brought you to found Enlight AI.
Mm-hmm. Good. If we start with the educational background, it's computer science and Japanese. So if you make plus and plus, you might guess a affinity for video games when I was younger. When I finished university and graduated, I went to Japan. I switched to management consulting. I keep to say I switched to the dark side of the force because going to consulting was more or less the only option to get a job in Asia as a fresh graduate. I spent there more than 10 years. And how is this connected to AI? I was there between 2006 and 2016. And I would say at the tail end of being in Asia, like 7 years Japan, 3 years China, it's when the current deep learning boom kicked in. And it was for me it's a little bit of a Rorschach test. It was both, amazing to see how Asian economies and politicians react, but it was also a little bit, shocking how little the reaction is in the West. Because it was in 2014 that Google showed its first autonomous car, the one that looked like an egg, real prototyping material. And I can remember when you looked at the New York Times or here, the Western newspapers like FAZ and The Guardian, it was more like, it's like a novelty. It's like, oh, it's so funny. I can take my phone, can take selfies, and it's driving me to the swimming pool. It was seen as a pure comfort situation. In Japan, the discussion was totally different. First of all, it was really headline news material. It was not something like this is for geeks or something or for automotive people.
More common.
Yeah, it was headline news. And the big media, like for example, the Asahi Shimbun, which is like the New York Times of Japan, they said this for them and for the economy, this is like the biggest event since the oil crisis at the end of the 70s. And why is that the case? They anticipated that now that you have a software stack coming from, from abroad, from the United States in that field, it's just a matter of time until you get a similar business model than with cell phones or TVs. So hardware is made in the location with the lowest production cost. It's related to a combination of regulation, labor laws, regulation, cost, and automation, plus software from abroad. So they say, does this now mean that it's game over for Japan? Mm-hmm. And this led to a huge uptake in investments from both the public and the private sector. And I remember 2015 on the Tokyo Motor Show, it was already full with announcements from companies that really double down and triple down budget-wise.
Wow.
So when I then, so fast forward 2016, I moved back to Austria. I noticed, the pressure is not that high to put it mildly if you compare it with the Asians. So the obvious thing you do is you make a company in that field, especially with the background in computer science. And the second part, because I was still used to Asian working hours, so what you do at 6 p.m., of course, you make your own non-profit. And this was how AI Austria, our non-profit, was created. This is also where I met your CEO and your founders for the first time in Tyrol. They were there at the founding event of AI Austria. But what are the odds?
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, you brought it from there to there, and then that's just right place, right time. That's tremendous. So that formed you to build what you have now, I guess.
Yeah, definitely, because it was interesting to see. I mean, neural networks are not new, so it depends if you open the book. It's either in the 70s, but let's say at least if you think of those architectures that are highly relevant for Anyline, like convolutional neural networks, they're a product of the 80s. It's like 1989 from Jan LeCun. So it's been around for quite some time. And I remember during my time at university, our professors were still like saying, "Hey, that's a fringe topic. Don't deal with that. This will never make any sense because
Wow.
we don't have the data, we don't have the computational power, and who knows if it ever works anyway."
Mhm.
And yeah, as such, it was basically two shoes dropped at the same time. On the one hand, you have this huge economic boom, or I would say expectation from the usual suspects like World Economic Forum, McKinsey, and so on. At the same time, the tech companies drive it with the blessing of the politicians. I think this trifecta is what makes it so special in my regard.
And it really makes you, I guess, makes it as relatable as it could be, because as you mentioned, back then it was around, but then all these developments that brought us to where we are now, it's become much more mainstream. So perhaps you saw that coming ahead of the curve, having been in Asia and seen these things be headline news.
It's also, I think what's also very important to notice, the discussion in Asia towards automation and robots is per se not negative. This is, I mean, I don't really what the reasons are why in the West it's discussed so negative. One could blame perhaps, let's say, the media we consume, let's say movies. But on the other hand, the art we consume is also, let's say, an expression of underlying thoughts and fears. And yeah, to not, I don't want to go too deep into that one, but it's interesting to see that in Japan or in China, if you see a robot, he's the friend. Oh, yeah, they have even for kids, it's starting. You have the baby blue ones, you have the pink ones that teach you, I don't know, a foreign language or a mathematics concept or how programming works. If you go to a hospital and they tell you that now something happens automatically, you will have nicely drawn robot that looks like he's giving you an injection. Of course, he doesn't, but it's all done in a very cute way.
More approachable.
Yeah, it's more approachable, and they are considered part of the society, or like an appliance. It's just something that is there, and it's not something that is here to get rid of the human labor force or of humanity as such. And I think this mindset is definitely helps to dive faster into the topic of application, and not so much philosophize what could happen if and when, and Yeah,
and I think talking robots and automatic servers or giving it a hospital injection, but when that relates to the technology behind it and the AI processes that those have optimized, because we're talking robots and this and that, and that's, I guess, at one far side of the spectrum, but the actual process that's optimized is kind of where we're going to be, I guess, seeing that more on our side of things with businesses and so on. So I'd love to start at that sort of broad look, the overall importance of AI in our culture and businesses that we deal with. Now, obviously, given your extensive background, you've probably seen hundreds of situations where AI has proven to be important. But I'd love for you to share some of the primary reasons for those companies listening. Why should they consider integrating AI into their business processes and practices? What's the most important thing that they need to be aware of when considering it?
Yeah, let's untangle these questions one by one, or let's say these themes. I mean, first of all, if you take one step back, why is this hype around AI so much? It's not just because Arnold Schwarzenegger is from Austria, but of course there are business figures behind it. And we screened quite some reports for within AI Austria to get an understanding how is this seen, on an international basis, how are the differences between China, the States, and so on. And I think at the end of the day, after more than 100 papers, you could say there's a common theme. You always end up with the three, let's say, major themes. The first one is that AI will lead to increased efficiency. The second one is that the pie as such is getting bigger. So additional economic growth. And the third one is also very interesting. It says lots of new business model will be enabled through AI. So now, let's say in broad strokes, this is what the expectation is towards AI. I think the most tangible one for companies, especially in the DACH region where we sit at the moment, like Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, is to focus on efficiency. So why is that the case? I mean, again, on the macro side of things, we are now in the area of the lowest productivity growth since World War II. This is a result of the financial, and it's not a result of the financial crisis, but you can pinpoint it to the time of 2008, 2009. Since then, total labor productivity growth has decreased. It basically has fallen flat. And if you know how the companies, especially the manufacturing companies, if you know their inner workings, they have to fulfill their annual efficiency improvements. Like the continuous improvement rate is for most companies between 2 and 3%. It's rather 3%. And how does AI play into that? Whereas in the past, you basically got your efficiency gains for free if you introduced SAP version X, or let's say, I don't know, Microsoft Office version Y, and so on. You don't have this effect anymore, because when it comes to structured data, the field is pretty much set. But when it comes to unstructured data, like image recognition, for example, this is where AI can be the big lever to get productivity growth again, like we had it in the 90s.
So really, I love that point on efficiency. Those three pillars are main, and we'll discuss sort of each of them a little bit. But coming to that efficiency point, for the companies that are perhaps looking to get started with AI as a main form to increase efficiency, in your experience, what are some of those business aspects that they could perhaps tackle first, especially when they're looking at efficiency?
Mm-hmm. If we start from the capability side of AI, I like the statements from Andrew Ng. You write him NG. So now the audience knows how to pronounce him. It's Ng because he's Cantonese. He said that you have to think of deep learning or AI's capabilities today like it's a horde of interns at your disposal. Like he says, think of an AI system like 10,000 interns working for you. Plus, what an AI can do for you is a cognitive process that a human can normally do within 1 second. I think the Anyline product is a perfect example for that. You know within a second what's written there. You don't transcribe it, probably, but you definitely know within 1 second what's there. You know, it's not a Van Gogh picture where you say, oh, it depends.
Yeah.
And
it's black and white. It's not up to impression, yeah.
Exactly. And with this, let's say, technical basis in your mind, think of processes within your company where you have, which are highly repeatable, but actually are quite effortless to learn for someone. So they're not highly specialized. So normally this is where most companies start with their AI efforts. It's not so much because for, let's say, specialized topic, it's more difficult, but it's rather because for this type of fields, you have larger data sets than for the specialized ones. Mm-hmm. So think of everything related to, you have a printed out paper in front of you. Banks are dealing with this nonstop. Accountants deal with this type of topics nonstop. You know, how to digitize what's written on a piece of paper, how to book it automatically, could be an invoice. If it goes a little bit deeper, it could also be a contract where you say, mark all the names there, or let's say, when is a certain type of regulation mentioned. On the other side of the spectrum, and I think that's equally important to note, it's not like that only the so-called easy 1 second tasks are automatable. It's also the sophisticated 1 second tasks. What do I mean with that one? I mean radiology, or let's say everything that is related to diagnostics based on images and videos. Could also be birthmarks, freckles, and so on. Bone, X-ray. This type of, let's say, diagnostics, if you conduct it with image analysis, also leads to a far higher accuracy than if the doctor is doing it alone. And I think these two examples are also very nice to show that the expectation or the way that the former one is perceived is also applied to the latter one. What do I mean with this one? With the former one, with, let's say, these quite easy trainable tasks, you put something from a piece of paper in a database or so on. Here you definitely talk about replacement through AI. And yeah, I know this is a very bad word, but I always say this is exactly what happened with outsourcing. I mean, the whole idea of a shared service center is, from the company's perspective, the same thing as an AI is doing. It's a topic where you say, this is not my core, let's say, competency. I outsource it. So from the economic perspective of the, let's say, of a G20 country or a G8 country, AI in that regard doesn't make that much difference because the big outsourcing waves already have happened. On the upper side of the spectrum, where I had the radiologist as an example, we do not talk about replacement, but it's rather augmentation. So here, the sum of the parts is really more, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So it's not like the system with a slightly higher accuracy will suddenly put radiologists out of business. It's rather the combination. So I think here we're rather following a model like you saw with accountants. It's always a good example. Everybody knows them. Few love them. And where Microsoft, I mean, you had the calculator, which was perceived to spell the doom for accountants. This was in the 60s. It's actually very funny. In the New York Times, every 10 years, in the previous century, every 10 years, you can find such a story. First, it was the calculator, then it were mainframes, then it were PCs, then it was Excel, now it's AI. But I mean, this is not empirically proven, but I'm quite sure there now there's more accountants than before. So it really takes, it's a huge difference which type of job you're talking about. And if it's augmented, or let's say complemented or replaced. And I think this is a discussion that is not really happening in my, if you open a newspaper, I don't have the impression that this discussion is happening a lot.
So instead of AI removing jobs, it's actually increasing the capacity for those with the job. So you're talking about like the accountants with the calculator. That's a great sort of metaphor. It didn't make accountants disappear. It made them work more efficiently and gave them the capacity to do more in their time. And you're seeing the same, I guess, for the companies listening and perhaps looking at going down this route. They can be confident that by embracing these technologies, by embracing some type of AI technology into their process, it's going to allow those people who are working with the AI to be more efficient and to do more in their day, in their week.
Yeah, and you also mentioned one very important word here. It's process. I think I always keep saying AI projects are process projects. I mean, of course, I have a background in management consulting, so you always see the world like you used to perceive it in the past, but it's more than that, because if we stick with the example I mentioned before, let's say digitize what's written in the paper, put it in a database and so on. If you start doing this, it's not that you start to make the same process that you have nowadays, and then afterwards you have an AI process. You rethink the whole thing. And as such, I find it, I think, a very good indicator if you talk with a company to understand if they really understood what's going on is from an organizational perspective, where is the AI team sitting, or let's say the data scientists. If it's in the CTO, or let's say in the CIO organization, this raises several red flags for me normally, because it means you see it as an IT topic, classical, IT topic for IT people.
Which it isn't. It doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be.
It's absolutely not, and that's the thing. Because if you look at the tech companies we can exclude for the time being, because they're just not relatable to.
Yeah, but the everyday business.
It's the everyday business, but it's also, if you look at the really large companies where money does not play such much of a role. Think of the automotive companies. The automotive companies, they have billions of R&D expenditures per year. They do not put the data scientists in the CIO organization. The same is true for the banks. The banks put it rather in the CFO organization. And why is that necessary? Because in order to get these efficiency benefits, you have to think cross-department and cross-function. And this is also something that is, I think now it's getting more normal, but I could say, so when we started in 2017, 18, this was something most people they were just not hardwired to do it. They were thinking, I have to gain efficiency in my department. So now I think, how can AI help my department? But you have to break this up. And I think in that regard, how you identify where can AI bring the biggest benefit, it's to a certain degree also a consulting problem. And there is actually, I mean, this is not something I make up. This is backed also what you read from Andreessen Horowitz, for example. Or, you're from Canada. Look at Element AI. I mean, Element AI is gigantic. They started with this research implementation approach, classical software as a service, but they also realized if you really want to do something end-to-end at the customer, you first need to understand the processes. And afterwards, you, let's say, slay the dragon of inefficiency with AI.
Yeah. And I guess sort of coming off of that and leading off of it, I'd love just a quick word on the dependability factor. Because I think a lot of people, when they lose the ability to do something themselves, the question about dependability, I guess it's trusting the technology. And we work with a lot of companies that have reduced manual processes, human error, meter reading, for example, or even the police forces we work with, having to manually write things down. They could trust what they're writing down, I guess, but it's trusting that the AI processes and the technology available is more than dependable. In fact, it reduces that human error. But I'd love a quick word from you on just like how to switch your mind from that. I guess how to fully trust the dependability of the technology you're implementing.
That's a good question because there's several different ways how you can answer that. I mean, you will end up with the same outcome, but let's say from a technical perspective, I think why is this discussion so strong with AI and we did not have this with previous generations? I think it's partially related to the history of AI because over the last few decades, there were two schools of thought. The one was thinking if you want to create a thinking machine or an intelligent machine, you first have to understand how the human brain is working or how certain decisions are made by humans. And then you, let's say, rebuild parts of it in an AI system in an artificial way. And so you will understand everything along the road.
Okay, so not as one, but as pieces.
Yeah, this is like the purist approach, as it's always sometimes called.
Mm-hmm.
Then the practical approach is basically what you see with convolutional neural networks. You train it, and even if it comes to a better conclusion, but based on completely different factors, we still take it because the outcome is better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this whole explainability, dependability topic is definitely something that was brought in by the purists, let's say initially to, let's say, sabotage it. But at the end of the day, it was a win situation also for the practicals, let's say for the practitioners, because it put more funds into opening this Pandora's box. So nowadays it's far easier. I mean, the famous examples are the HR systems from Google and Amazon. Discrimination against, let's say, by gender or by what was it, race and gender. You have this in images in terms of image recognition, and because the question was raised, and it was raised in let's say such a big, let's say at such a big scale. The problem is tackled nowadays. So this is, I wouldn't say it's fully finished, of course not, but it's a very promising sign that if, let's say, society raises a concern, it also goes into the AI systems. What I find a little bit funny in that situation is we are surrounded by tools or especially sensors where I think most people don't know what they're actually doing. So yeah, of course they produce an output, but I think very few people know if the image sensor that is now in a, let's say, the crossroads or something, or in a door opening system, if this one is working the same well, independent of race and gender, because no one ever tried it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
it's dipping your foot in, I guess, like you said, maybe not as a full project, but in order to trust it, it's little steps at a time to just have that dependability in the back of your head. So you're not questioning things as a whole project.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's good that AI's level is scrutinized at this level.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we should also be aware AI is not the only thing. where this type of, let's say, unintended outcomes can happen. So yeah, it would be not good to miss the forest for the sequoia tree in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not just a tree; it's a big one.
Yes. That's a great way to think of it. I love it. All right, so moving on here, I think one of the hottest topics when we talk about artificial intelligence, and again, maybe that's because of the media or because of the movies we're portrayed to this, but it has to do with safety and security. I think that's one of the hottest topics, not only for those using it, the operators, but also for the information being processed. I mean, we're talking about vast amounts of private and sensitive information in these systems. And I think you and I and the audience will agree as well that we see the highlight on the news of data leaks way too often. And I think that puts a sense of fear when we look at these processes, again, because we're not in control as we would be. We're putting it in a machine's trust, I guess. So I guess that's why this topic is obviously so hot, because it's so unknown. So I'd love to know from you, and perhaps able to provide assurances that by undertaking AI into your operational practices, that safety and security, there are protocols, there are processes in place to protect these. So any type of assurance you can offer the audience, maybe even, things that are already taking place that we don't know about, that the common person doesn't know about, that's keeping our data safe and secure.
I think the topic of keeping data safe and secure is not an AI topic. Because if you think of the real big leaks, it was like life insurance in the United States or the federal, pension fund or something got hacked. So you have hundreds of millions of data sets out in the wild. And for this type of lax data security and protection, it's the data. It doesn't matter what you do afterwards with it. First of all, let's say, figuratively speaking, if you think of the bank, first you need to build the vault. If the vault is too easy to crack, it doesn't matter if you hand out commercial loans or, private loans or whatever with it. But I think where AI can step into this to make it more secure, I mean, first of all, everything related to threat detection and cybersecurity. There are a couple of companies like that. I mean, from the UK, Darktrace is probably the most famous one. It's already reached unicorn status as far as I know. But the far more interesting topic for me is synthetic data. This means you take the original record, you create a synthetic copy out of it. The original data you really put into the vault, let's say into your Fort Knox. And with the synthetic data, you work like you work nowadays. I think why is this interesting with synthetic data? I mean, there's even a company in Austria that is doing this. This is now a couple of companies doing this in the world. You can make this business analytics also on top of synthetic data. And one important thing I forgot to mention, of course, you have to differentiate if it's data related to real world people and businesses or if it's machine data.
Okay.
So
two big differences.
Yeah, I mean, as much as some companies might love their drilling machines, they don't need the privacy covered.
It's not as much as someone's passport information, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of, let's say, if you use synthetic data to create copies of real world data, and you work with that one, fulfilling data protocols, I think you're pretty much safe because there are benchmarks that it's impossible, or where you can prove it's impossible to trace this back to individual person or so on. At the same time, I think in terms of data breaches, the governments need to step up regulation. Mm-hmm. It's a bit similar to what happened after the financial crisis, where you have these bank stress tests and so on, Glass-Steagall Act. Something like this definitely needs to come for data because at the moment you have a couple of random certificates, but at the end of the day, what was the most recent one, Simflower, at the end of the day, all of them are open.
Yeah.
And so from the data perspective, but again, I would bring in the efficiency angle. If you throw AI at the problem, both creating synthetic copies and let's do the intrusion detection, it's something you can do as a company of all sizes, because even if now you cannot afford a specific, let's say, data security team or SecOps, with AI you can.
So it gives you a department, it gives you a security department.
Mm-hmm.
I like the way of thinking that. So AI isn't really the problem when it comes to these leaks, but AI can be used to solve the problem. So for those looking at integrating it, it's not so much thinking of it as the way of AI will cause situations where there could be privacy leaks or anything with the data, but it's actually the solution to solve those potential.
I think there was one guy from Andreessen Horowitz that made a good statement over the weekend. He was saying, I forgot his name, it's the blockchain guy. He said that in 20 years, at the latest, you will have the situation that if you create a profile somewhere, it will be all synthetic data. And I can see us moving in that direction already. For example, what Apple implemented with iOS 13, I think, was the ability to create an account with a temporary address, or let's say with a fictional address Apple is creating for you.
Mhm.
So instead of typing Clemens Wasner is, I don't know, let's say, subscribing to The Economist, you can just press sign in with Apple ID, and
Yes.
then he has just an alphanumeric code, a rather long one, and this is acts as a buffer between me and the publisher of The Economist. And I think this will come into play, but of course, from if you think of it like attack vectors, it's moving the attack vector away from the publisher or the health insurance and rather closer to the technology company.
Mm-hmm. So it's shifting that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you'll see more of that, I think, is what you're saying. You'll expect to see more of that type of technology being used.
Yeah.
I'm remembering now, as you said, that there's many situations where, they have that. The last time I've actually had to fill out a registration form for anything was a while ago, because you can always, use another account to log into it. So that's what that process is doing. It's separating it.
Yeah. And you create synthetic identities. So
super interesting.
And
that's crazy to think of, but that's a great insight.
I totally see this coming, because it's already starting.
Mm-hmm.
And with images, it's the same. I mean, in 20 years and 10 years, if you do a live streaming, you will choose how you want to look like. Do you now want to be do you want to be the 20-year-old Mark, or you want to be the 40-year-old Mark? You just adjust it.
Just like a little toggle switch. That's crazy. So I guess leading off of that and looking more towards the future, obviously I love to take advantage of experts such as yourself, especially in this field. So looking to the head, now we just had an example of something you're expecting to see in the future, but again, looking to the next decade, what do you see as AI impacting the most for processes? Now, obviously the fun stuff of technology and the robots and the automated cars and all of this is one angle, but I'd really love to focus on, when it comes to businesses integrating these technologies, what is going to be the most impactful change in the next number of years that you see?
I like the number 3. So let's say three
topics. Everyone seems to love 3 points.
Or let's say 5, these 5 topics that made these 3 CEOs successful. This is now a BuzzFeed headline.
I'm taking it.
First of all, learning. I think what your company is doing is a very good example. You come from a world where you need large data sets to do what you do. Read, let's say, alphanumeric codes, passports, and so on. You have large data sets. You now set up this research cooperation with Sepp Hochreiter, like the father of LSTM and one of the heads in this area. And it's now going in the direction of few-shot learning and one-shot learning. This is, of course, that's a technical term. Most listeners will say, why should I care? The point is, you don't need this huge number of data sets anymore to train it on a new challenge, or let's say on a new task. So this is definitely a game changer, that you take a company that, let's say, has fulfilled 5 use cases already, can easily introduce use case 6 and 7 with this type of methodology without having to train again for half a year in data collection and so on.
So a lot less work to make those incremental gains.
Yeah. So the learning is becoming much more efficient, and as such, it lowers the barrier by a lot, because you just do it. You don't have. You don't need the Anyline people in your house and you talk and say, oh, okay, come again in half a year. You just say start, and in 2 weeks we look at results. This is surely a big game changer.
Okay.
Second, at the moment, and here I come back to this metaphor again, or think of the 10,000 interns doing this type of stuff. we are now moving in the territory where you start to optimize stuff where we as humans don't really know how it works, where we use lots of our gut feeling, and which is for our brains really complex. And I don't talk about, let's say, image inspection for freckles and so on. I talk about stuff like logistics optimizations, type of anything related to warehouses and routing and freight forwarding, or also complexity. What is the perfect complexity of, let's say, entire car portfolio and so on? And what I think was here was the watershed moment was AlphaGo. The technology used here was reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning has been around for ages. I remember, let's say, at the beginning of the last decade, it was applied to Super Mario and Pong because it learned by itself how to master Super Mario.
That's incredible. Yeah. Okay.
Don't run into the Goomba. This is bad. Run to the flagpole.
Yeah. Jump over the gap. Yep.
Yeah. And people then moved to more complex games. Chess, the obvious candidate, but Go was the more interesting one because Go you cannot optimize like you did with Deep Blue because it has too many possible combinations. It's like 10 by the power of 100.
Wow.
And people expected to take AI at least another 20 years to solve it, but it was solved in 2016 or 17 and not in 2040. But both of these problems, or let's say both of these nice outcomes still have the problem they're not transferable to the real business world because these are well-defined problems because they're games. You see every time
everything's fixed. Yeah, there's no variables.
Yeah. And what is now the interesting thing that reinforcement learning with newer methods is applied to real-world problems. Again, they are trained in gaming environments because gaming environments are in 3D games have far more, let's say, inefficiencies or let's say inaccuracies. Think of Grand Theft Auto, think of StarCraft, where you don't see
open world,
what the other one is doing. And now we are experiencing the first wave of this new breed of reinforcement learning solutions being rolled out in the real world. So in terms of, let's say, logistics, think of a stock replenishment, a warehouse, you get suddenly 20% optimization. Think of a production process optimization, again, 20 to 25%. The same is true for energy trading or let's say energy grid optimization. That's something we had blackouts, for example, recently in Europe, because this is a problem you cannot deal with classical methods. And here reinforcement learning comes into place. And I think for me, this is a large and big shift towards smarter AI because you hear, again, it's not substitution, it's augmentation. But you give humans a tool at their disposal that is so powerful that the human alone could never do that. It's sort of like Microsoft Excel, to use this analogy. And this is quite amazing because I think this will also have an impact on how we approach these problems in the future.
So it'll be coming off from the starting gate, not having such a limited, I guess, outlook on the capabilities because it's so much farther beyond than what we're even capable of thinking.
Yeah, because nowadays I think lots of the thinking goes in the direction I need lots of data and the task needs to be relatively stupid from a cognitively load perspective.
Yeah, but now it's completely the opposite.
It's completely the opposite. And staying with the example of Go, Go players are highly trained. They're like chess champions. And AlphaGo and the subsequent problems have changed the way Go works. So you used to have teachers or let's say people that writing books about it and professionals learning from special trainers and so on. Nowadays, everyone is learning from the machine and the machine has changed the way Go is played nowadays.
So it's actually completely come full circle in that respect.
Yeah. And I totally see this coming in the topics I laid out before. There are many other ones because this type of, we often say where we act on a gut feeling. A machine doesn't need this gut feeling to optimize how your warehouse should be stocked, for example. And I think
based off of a set parameters.
And there I can see it coming very strongly. Again, not for displacement or replacement, but rather like augmentation.
Yep.
And third, everything that is related to the creation of content. Most of the AI applications we had in the 2010s was you put the input in the AI system. The AI system will tell you if it's a dog or a cat, or if the machine will break down in 2 weeks or in 3 months. This was basically just predicting on the input what's the output. What you have nowadays with newer architectures like generative adversarial networks, you know them from deepfakes. With this technology, you can synthesize video, picture, voice,
Massive amounts of data.
writing.
Yeah.
So let's say it's not a stretch of imagination to say in 5 years, if you will not do an Anyline podcast anymore, but you will just make it like a TV show. Because in the past you would use stock images and put it on your homepage. You know, the happy people looking at cell phones. It's everywhere the same.
Yes.
in the future, you can say, I want to have 3 people sitting here and I don't know, checking out the homepage of the New York Times while scrolling on their window and something, and this will be generated
By itself.
Yeah.
Wow.
And as such, content creation, I think, will be completely changed. And if content creation is changed, it also changes our consumption behavior. As you saw actually in the last decade with the switch to mobile, then from horizontal video to vertical video. And then let's say from classical video like YouTube is, or Facebook video to something like TikTok, which is 15 seconds. Or becoming more ephemeral and so on. So definitely, if the means of creation change, also the means of consumption will change a lot, and as such our behavior.
And start feeding each other. Yeah. Like you said, the expectations will change. So therefore the behaviors will change, and then the expectations will change again. And it's just, two going at it and growing exponentially. Super incredible. Wow. That's crazy to think of it. Has a profound effect.
And the crazy thing is it's already here. I mean, there's the company Rosebud AI.
Okay.
Rosebud, like the sledge of Citizen Kane. And they are a startup in Silicon Valley that started, I think, in 2017 to use these GANs, these generative networks, to create avatars.
Okay.
It started with stock photography. It's all very nice. Recently, they can already create videos for you. So you type them in English. You can even choose the accent, Canadian, Midwest, whatever. And you get a talking head that looks uncannily real. And even with a transparent background and so on. So you can
use it in multiple.
You can just stick it here and pretend it was here. And if a small... scrappy, you know what how I mean it. If a small company can do this with at max 50 people, just think what the company like Adobe or Nvidia or Google will do in the next couple of years.
Once it becomes more mainstream.
Yeah, it will be like a Cambrian explosion of content creation.
Wow. That's crazy to think of. And I love that aspect of it, the AI surpassing what we think is capable for a process, coming back to supply chain or logistics or fleet management or any of these things where we want to think of it in a certain way. AI is going to allow us to think way beyond that because the capabilities are much more beyond what we would even think is possible, but it is possible for a machine.
Yeah, and it will also raise very interesting questions because do you know Damien Hirst, the artist from the UK?
Yes.
The one with the skull with diamonds that sold for what, 150 million pounds. Poor man's art.
Yeah, poor man's art.
He is famous, among other things, because he has it's not called factory, but let's call it factory for the time being. What does this mean? He has these very famous dots, and he has hearts of people painting the dots for him. And of course, the more, let's say, exposed he became in the media, the more famous, the richer. People said, you're not a real artist. These are the people drawing the dots. So why are you call yourself an artist? And I think this is a discussion that will also move over to AI in the same way as, let's say, people using Photoshop were questioned if they're artists in the 90s. You will have this with the AI tools. And with this in mind, I like the answer of Damien Hirst a lot. I think it was the beginning of the last decade. He was saying, are you people even aware that Michelangelo and Leonardo did exactly the same? They didn't paint the Sixth Chapel.
Sistine Chapel, yeah.
Sistine Chapel by themselves. No human could do that alone. They had hearts of people helping them. We also say they were not artists. So I think in terms of what we perceive as creativity, it will force us to take a closer look and really define what we mean. So it
won't mean what it's meant in the past.
It's just to specify it. Let's put it like this. In the same way as something is not a quality media just because it's printed in a certain format, in the same way something is not automatically creative just because it's using a certain type of technique. I mean, the human factor is always the deciding one,
Yes.
and it forces you to look at what is really the human factor.
Interesting. Yeah, it's crazy. Just it changes the way you even think about common tasks. And yeah, I love that. It's incredible. The stuff that we've discussed about, even with past guests as well, is there's so much going on that the common person doesn't know about yet. Like there's so many processes that are already being implemented that we take for granted. Deepfake's a great example. There's so much future technology happening there, and that's just like a % of it being used, and it's already blowing our minds. So that's incredible. No, really, really great discussion. Super enlightening for myself. I'm confident the audience will think the same. But yeah, as you said, some really great metaphors there to really think about it more, I guess, holistically outside of the way we think it can optimize process, but the fact that not only will it optimize the process, but it'll optimize the way we think that process can be done, and really allow us to expand our thinking beyond that because of the capabilities. And again, that great metaphor you said of it's like hiring 100 interns to do something for you more reliably, perhaps as well. Depends where they come from.
But you have to pay us. It also means you have to buy the sandwich by your own. You cannot send someone to buy it.
Yeah, machines don't need sandwiches.
As the old joke goes.
I love it. Great. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really great discussion. I know the audience listening will be able to take some super valuable stuff away, hopefully, and start integrating process for themselves. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thanks a lot for having me in this marvelous studio.
Thank you for the coffee. Much needed this morning. And for everyone watching, thank you so much for being with us today. A very enlightening talk, as we've mentioned. Hopefully you were able to take away some super valuable insights and perhaps even start thinking about integrating AI into your business processes, whether that be small little steps at a time or an overall project. Of course, if you have any questions about anything we discussed today, please feel free to reach out to Clemens or myself on LinkedIn. We'll make sure those links are available for you. Or if you want to go ahead, just drop a comment on this video and we'll make sure you get the answer as quickly as possible. So please don't hesitate there. Until next time, as always, stay happy, stay healthy. We'll see you on the next interview.